Hey guys, tonight we slip into the shadowed alleys of Brooklyn, where the streetlights flicker just enough to catch the glint of something sharp, and we're not just talking blades. We're heading into the life of a man whose name carried the soft hiss of danger, Carmine Persico, better known as the Snake. Picture this: Brooklyn, late 1940s. Steam curls from sewer grates. The sidewalks are cracked with old gum and newer sins, and a wiry kid named Carmine learns the rules of a world that doesn't write anything down unless it's in blood. You're not just dipping into a mob story tonight. You're slithering beside one of the most calculating minds in Mafia history. Persico wasn't just ruthless, he was strategic. He wasn't the loudest in the room, but he always had the last whisper. And here's the kicker: he ran an entire crime family from behind bars for decades. Try pulling that off while the feds watch your every move. Your friends turn into snitches, and your son becomes your shadow. You probably won't survive this one awake, not because it's terrifying, but because it moves like molasses over cold marble. Slow, smooth, inevitable. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're up for it, drop a comment with your city and what time it is where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Carmine Charles Persico Jr. is born on August 8th, 1933, right in the middle of the Great Depression and smack in the middle of Brooklyn's Carroll Gardens neighborhood. His father, an immigrant from southern Italy, runs a legal stenography business, a respectable front, or maybe just a reflection of the kind of quiet precision Carmine will come to master. The Persico household is modest, not poor, but not glittering either. Italian traditions fill the rooms, garlic and basil scent the air, and unspoken rules hang heavier than the framed crucifix. By age 10, Carmine already knows which corners belong to which guys. He isn't a bully. He's a reader. Of people, mostly. His instincts are what set him apart. While other kids are throwing punches or stealing bikes, Carmine's watching, calculating. Who flinched? Who didn't? Who owed who what? He attends St. Stephen's parochial school, wears a too-tight uniform, and learns that silence can be an answer. He's not big, not brawny, but there's a calmness to him that unnerves his classmates. Like he knows something they don't. A teacher once said he had a stillness unnatural for a boy his age. That stillness, it would follow him all the way to Rikers and beyond. By his mid-teens, Persico drops out of high school. Not because he's lazy, but because school doesn't offer the kind of education he's interested in. The streets do. He joins a local street gang known as the Garfield Boys, a name more reminiscent of a Sunday comic strip than an actual crew, but don't let that fool you. These boys are tough, bored, and looking for something worth the risk. The Garfield Boys operate mostly on strong-arm tactics, extortion, hijacking trucks, and occasionally dabbling in protection rackets. Nothing fancy, just fear in a leather jacket. Carmine fits in, but doesn't blend in. He's already playing a deeper game. Where most of his peers think in fists, he thinks in consequences. It's in this arena of post-war grit and disillusioned youth that Carmine earns his nickname, the Snake. Not because he's treacherous, though sure, that'll come later, but because he has this eerie way of sliding through trouble untouched. Charges get dropped, cops look away, rivals forget his face. He's not the kind of guy you remember until it's too late. One early incident cements that reputation. A teenage rumble, 6 on 6, brass knuckles and broken noses, ends with one boy dead from a cracked skull. Carmine is picked up, booked, and just as quickly, released. Self-defense, they say. No one saw nothing. But many people still think that Carmine pulled a few strings behind the scenes, or had someone else pull them for him. So what do you think? Just luck, or early proof of his quiet power? The incident shakes some of his crew. A few even drift away. But Carmine remains. Not only that, he starts climbing. Not by fighting harder, but by disappearing when needed and reappearing at just the right time. Like smoke, or a well-placed whisper. As the 1950s roll in, the Mafia is already entrenched in New York like mold behind old wallpaper. The 5 families are in full operation: Gambino, Genovese, Lucchese, Bonanno, and Profaci, the latter being where Carmine's future lies. Joseph Profaci, the old-school boss known for his devotion to both his faith and his fortune, runs a tight ship. But that ship is leaking. Soldiers are restless. Gallo brothers are sharpening their teeth. Carmine knows better than to charge the front door. He slips in through the side. His cousin, Larry Persico, has some connections. Carmine leverages that, quietly of course. He starts doing jobs for low-level guys tied to the Profaci crew, hijacking trucks, collecting debts, making people disappear without fanfare. And here's where you begin to see what separates him from your average streetwise tough. Carmine doesn't enjoy violence. He respects it, uses it when necessary, stores it like ammo when not. He once said, well, according to a guy who swears he heard it, "Never waste a bullet on someone who'll bury himself." There's also the matter of image. Persico isn't flashy. No open shirts and gold chains. No pinky rings the size of walnuts. He wears plain suits, keeps his voice low, and never interrupts. Even at 20, he moves like a man who expects to be listened to, even in silence. By the end of the decade, his loyalty to Profaci is clear, but he also keeps one eye on the Gallo crew. Not in admiration, more like curiosity. Crazy Joe Gallo is loud, unpredictable, and always looking for a stage. Carmine watches, learns, and files it away. His world is expanding, so are the risks, but Carmine isn't chasing power. Not yet. Right now, he's chasing position, proximity, information. And he's very, very patient. After all, a snake never strikes in a hurry. The Carroll Street stoop where Carmine Persico once sat, shoulders narrow, mind already sharp, fades into the rear view of his story. Now, it's the late 1950s, and Brooklyn hums with the vibration of shifting power. Young men who once bagged groceries or worked in neighborhood garages are suddenly wearing suits, driving Buicks with suspiciously clean trunks, and collecting envelopes from restaurant owners with shaking hands. Carmine watches all this with the same quiet hunger he's always had. Never loud, never greedy, but hungry. He's now officially working under the Profaci family, and that means doing things by the book. Well, their book. He handles collections at first, small stuff, and makes it look like he was born with a ledger in one hand and a baseball bat in the other. The bosses like him because he doesn't talk too much. The street guys like him because he never leaves them hanging. And most importantly, nobody ever seems to know exactly what he's thinking. That makes people uncomfortable. It also makes them respect him. By now, he's around 25, but there's nothing boyish left in his demeanor. His stare is unblinking, but not aggressive. His laugh is rare, and when it comes, It usually means someone else is about to have a very bad day. He's learning fast about the politics inside the 5 families, about how union jobs can be milked for more than paychecks, and about which cops are too well fed to care what happens after dark. And right in the middle of this evolution, something small but crucial happens. It starts in a pool hall on Smith Street. Cigarette smoke coils above battered green tables, and Persico leans over a shot he doesn't need to make. He's not there to win, just to listen. A rival crewman, loud and 2 drinks past subtlety, mutters something about that little snake from Carroll Street. The insult isn't shouted. It slipped out like a hairline crack in glass. Carmine looks up, slowly, like he's choosing whether to blink, and holds the man's eyes. He says nothing, just sinks the 8-ball in perfect silence. The next week, that same man is seen limping into a pharmacy, with his jaw wired shut and one finger permanently curved like a hook. No one's arrested. No one's even accused. But the name, the Snake, starts making its rounds, not as mockery, but as quiet gospel. Now, the thing about nicknames in the Mafia is they either come from affection or warning. The Snake starts as the former, but soon becomes both. Carmine leans into it. He's not flashy, but he doesn't shy away from mythology. If fear makes people comply faster, why not? He once told a guy, if they already think you bite, you don't need to open your mouth. A joke? Maybe, but it hits close to the bone. Soon enough, he's climbing. Joe Profaci notices his calm, his ability to smooth over feuds without raising his voice, to collect without breaking noses, unless absolutely necessary. He starts earning respect not just as a tough, but as a thinker, a strategist, one of those rare underworld figures who could tell you which bookie skipped a payment and which judge was suddenly sitting on an envelope full of reasons not to testify. But there's one thing Carmine understands better than most. Power breeds cracks. And the Profaci family? It's already splitting at the seams. See, Joe Profaci is a traditionalist. He runs the family like a Roman emperor, expects tribute, demands respect, and lives lavishly off the dues his men pay. Some don't mind, but others, particularly the Gallo brothers, are getting itchy. They're the young blood, hungry, hot-tempered, and sick of watching old men eat while they do the heavy lifting. Persico stands at a crossroads. He's friendly with the Gallos. He shares drinks with Larry Gallo. He talks politics with Joey. But he also knows Profaci has been good to him, better than most bosses would be to a rising soldier from Carroll Street. And then, one summer night, Carmine makes a choice. In a smoky corner booth at a diner that no longer exists, he sips coffee with Larry Gallo and hears whispers of rebellion. An ultimatum is coming. Profaci is bleeding the crew dry, and the younger guys want to push back. Hard. Carmine stirs his coffee, adds sugar, doesn't react, and when the crackdown comes, when Profaci moves to crush the Gallo insurrection, Carmine stays put, doesn't side with the Gallos, doesn't betray them either, just waits, watches, like a snake beneath warm stone. It's a gamble. He risks losing his crew, his standing, even his life. But it pays off. When the rebellion fizzles and Profaci reasserts control, Carmine's quiet loyalty earns him a bump. Not a big one. Not yet. But in this business, small promotions matter more than flashy ones. They last. Many people still think that Persico was playing both sides during that internal war, feeding just enough info to the Gallos to gain their trust, while keeping Profaci informed enough to stay in the inner circle. So what do you think? Was it survival Or was it the early sign of a man who would one day manipulate entire wars from behind a prison wall? Regardless, Carmine learns a lesson here. Maybe the most important one of his life. Never rush into the light. Let others jump at glory. Stay just outside the frame. Keep your ear to the ground and your tongue behind your teeth. He starts spending more time in the background. Not disappearing, just folding into the scenery. He lets other men yell, posture, threaten. He nods, smiles when appropriate, pretends to agree, then walks out of the room knowing exactly who to trust and who to bleed. His rise accelerates. He's no longer collecting envelopes. He's counting them. No longer running errands. He's assigning them. Still young, barely 30, and already shaping the movements of a family whose roots run deeper than the sewers of Bensonhurst. And just like that, Carroll Street feels miles away. But Carmine never forgets it. Never stops carrying the ghosts of those cracked sidewalks in the way he moves, the way he thinks. Even as he circles closer to the crown, he keeps his head down, because snakes don't climb ladders. They slither up the side, quiet, unseen, until they're suddenly right beside the throne. Brooklyn changes with the seasons, but the rules never do. You either adapt or you disappear. By the early 1960s, Carmine Persico is adapting like ivy across a brick wall. Slow, silent, inevitable. The Profaci family, though, is not doing so well. Infighting and poor leadership have turned the once stable family into a simmering pot of grudges. Boss Joe Profaci's health is declining, and the Gallo brothers, back from their failed rebellion, are simmering in exile. It's a dangerous time to rise. Naturally, that's when Carmine tightens his grip. Now officially a made man and respected as more than just that quiet kid from Carroll Street, Persico begins showing his flair for strategic betrayal. He's still low-key, sure. He isn't tossing money around nightclubs or rubbing elbows with movie stars. But he's in every room that matters. He listens more than he speaks, and that's precisely why others speak freely around him. He becomes a mirror, reflecting what others want to believe, but never revealing his true face. He starts maneuvering his way into higher-level rackets, hijackings, union jobs, and a little light extortion. But his real genius lies in quietly observing who's gunning for power. He sees the fractures within the Profaci regime. The death of Joe Profaci in 1962 doesn't solve anything. It just creates a vacuum. The commission installs Joe Magliocco, Profaci's brother-in-law, as the new boss. But Magliocco is weak, more of a placeholder than a real Don. Everyone can smell it, especially Persico. While the rest of the family bickers over who gets what territory, Carmine is laying groundwork. Not for a coup. That would be too obvious. Instead, he builds relevance. He makes himself useful to every side. To the older loyalists, he's dependable. To the newer soldiers, he's someone who listens. And to the commission, he's invisible. Which is exactly how he wants it. During this time, Persico is allegedly involved in more than one unsanctioned hit. One in particular, a certain loan shark found floating in Sheepshead Bay, draws quiet attention from law enforcement. But nothing sticks. As usual, he's either 5 steps ahead or nowhere near the crime scene. Many people still think that Persico used the hit not just to eliminate a threat, but to send a message to the Gallo crew. You're not the only ones with reach. And then comes the moment that will elevate him from soldier to somebody. Crazy Joe Gallo, tired of waiting for his own crown, makes another move. This time, it's even bolder. A kidnapping scheme targeting Magliocco loyalists unfolds over a matter of weeks. High-ranking captains are abducted, shaken up, and released. It's chaotic, and it sends shock waves through the family. This is where Persico pulls his most serpentine move yet. He sets up a meeting with Larry Gallo, Joey's brother, and one of the few people Persico still shares some personal history with. The meeting takes place in a barbershop basement, dimly lit, humid, a place that smells like hair tonic and linoleum. Persico arrives early. He doesn't bring backup, just a calm voice and a steel spine. The discussion begins politely enough. Larry lays out his terms, his frustrations. Carmine listens, nods. Then, at some unseen cue, Larry is attacked. A garrote slips around his neck. The plan is clean, silent, final, but something goes wrong. Larry struggles harder than expected. A cleaning lady walks in. Chaos erupts. Larry escapes, barely. The failed hit becomes known as the barbershop strangling. It's sloppy, unlike Persico's usual MO, but it leaves a message in the air like smoke. Carmine has chosen a side, and it isn't the gallows. Now this could have ended him, but instead, it earns him something more valuable than loyalty: fear. The other captains start treating him with a kind of delicate caution. Not because he's dangerous in the classic sense. Plenty of guys in this world can pull a trigger, but because he's calculating. Because he moves without making noise, and because you never quite know when he's playing nice or playing for keeps. By 1963, Joe Magliocco is out, pushed aside by the commission after a botched plot to kill rival bosses comes to light. The family is renamed the Colombo family, after Joe Colombo, who steps in as boss. Carmine is promoted again. Capo, now, running his own crew, managing collections, rackets, and more importantly, information. He becomes known as a guy who can get you what you need. A union vote, a silent partner, a cop who's just sleepy enough to lose a file. He's never seen raising his voice. Never has to. His crew includes men twice his size and half his intelligence, and yet every one of them listens like he's the only guy who knows the way out of a fire. One anecdote that floats around like urban folklore. A soldier from another crew accuses Carmine's crew of skimming off a hijacking operation. He demands a sit-down. Carmine shows up alone, orders 2 espressos, and sits across from the man in a cafe near Fort Hamilton Parkway. No yelling, no threats, just 10 minutes of calm conversation. 2 days later, that soldier withdraws his claim and offers Carmine a gift in apology. A vintage car, they say, though Persico never drove it. Said it was too loud. The 1960s Mafia scene is heating up. The FBI is now deeply invested. Bobby Kennedy's Justice Department is squeezing mobsters like juice from overripe oranges. RICO laws are on the horizon. Wiretaps are popping up in phone booths like mushrooms after rain. And Carmine? He adapts, slithers away from predictable routines, starts using messengers instead of phones, holds meetings at construction sites where cement mixers drown out conversations, tells his men to never say his name, just nod when talking about the guy. Like Voldemort, but in a better suit. He even begins exploring political inroads, cozying up to unions, suggesting donations, smoothing over grievances in ways that don't make headlines, but certainly earn him leverage. He's not just a street guy anymore. He's management, middle-tier power with high-level potential. Yet, through all of it, Carmine keeps his public footprint small. No yachts, no flashy clubs, no appearances at fancy weddings that get photographed by the press. He wears gray suits, favors cheap cologne, and once told a young soldier, "Luxury makes you forget how fast the floor disappears." And here's the twist. The more invisible he makes himself, the more powerful he becomes. People start talking about him like he's already a boss, even though he isn't. Not yet. Not officially. But that day is coming. Snakes don't strike without coiling first. And Carmine? He's coiling, waiting for the right moment, the right vacuum, and maybe, just maybe, the right betrayal. When you're a capo in the Colombo family, power isn't something you hold. It's something you borrow. From reputation, from fear, from the idea that your enemies believe you're 3 steps ahead, even if you're only 2. Carmine Persico, now firmly established as a top-tier player in the Colombo hierarchy, understands this better than anyone. And as the 1960s grind on, civil unrest boiling in the streets, television sets flickering images of war and protest, Carmine is perfecting the subtler war of organized crime. By now, his crew controls various rackets, construction kickbacks, labor unions, hijackings, and the always lucrative loan sharking business. The money's steady, the respect even steadier. But the streets are changing. The old guard is fading, and young Turks with shorter tempers and louder mouths are itching to make their names. That suits Carmine just fine. He's never minded letting others do the talking. He just prefers to decide who gets to talk. One of the first serious tests of his authority comes not from outside the family, but from within. An ambitious soldier named Anthony DeBello, not even 30 and already acting like he owns a district, begins skimming from a loan shark operation under Persico's oversight. It's not subtle. He throws wild parties, buys a Cadillac in cash, and brags in a social club that nobody's watching. A fatal misunderstanding. Carmine doesn't react right away, doesn't raise a hand, doesn't send a warning. He simply invites DeBello to dinner at a steakhouse in Sheepshead Bay. Mid-meal, he asks the waiter to bring a pen. Carmine jots a few numbers on a napkin. Columned figures, debts owed, payments missed. He slides it across the table. DeBello stares. The numbers are exact, down to the penny. Carmine just says, "So, tell me how nobody's watching." The silence between them lasts longer than the steak. DeBello's name quietly disappears from the books soon after. Whether he was transferred, demoted, or something colder, no one really says. But Carmine's nickname, the Snake, starts making a comeback in whispered conversations. And here's the thing. Persico isn't a sadist. He doesn't enjoy cruelty. He requires control. In the Colombo family, disobedience isn't punished for revenge. It's erased for efficiency. One sit-down during this time becomes the stuff of legend, at least in certain Brooklyn bars. A truckload of designer suits, Armani they say, gets hijacked. 2 crews claim the job, one from Carmine's crew, the other loyal to a different capo. A dispute arises. Voices raise. The tension crackles. They meet in Bensonhurst, a nondescript warehouse with creaking lights overhead and cracked tile beneath their shoes. Carmine doesn't shout. He doesn't accuse. He simply lays out a timeline, minute by minute, showing that his men had control of the truck before the other crew even arrived. He finishes by saying, "If you want the suits, you can have them, but you'll owe us interest." The other crew folds, not because they fear bullets, but because they realize Persico has receipts, mental, if not on paper, and that arguing with him is like trying to beat a chess player in a game you didn't realize had started. By the mid-60s, his influence grows past his own family. Genovese and Gambino associates are beginning to include him in quiet consultations. He's not a boss yet, but he behaves like one, and more importantly, other bosses begin to treat him like one. It helps that he keeps his hands clean. relatively speaking. No messy hits, no club shootings. He prefers efficiency over spectacle. He tells one associate, "Blood gets headlines. Headlines bring heat. Heat melts everything." But there's one man Carmine keeps a wary eye on. Sonny Franzese. Now there's a different flavor of dangerous. Sonny, the charismatic underboss with movie star looks and a mean streak a mile wide, is a wild card. While Carmine operates from the shadows, Sonny is all flash. Nightclubs, models, even Hollywood ties. He's the kind of guy who smiles during a stick-up, the kind who wears expensive shoes to a funeral he arranged. Their relationship is complicated. They respect each other's space, but the air crackles when they're in the same room. Carmine sees Sonny as unpredictable. Sonny sees Carmine as cold. Neither is wrong. One anecdote. In 1966, during a quiet Christmas gathering hosted by a Colombo captain, both men show up. The room is filled with laughter, Frank Sinatra on vinyl, pasta steaming from the kitchen. But when Persico walks in, the room falls slightly quieter, not out of fear, but from recalibration. Sonny, always the showman, raises a glass and says, "To the man who never blinks." Carmine smiles, doesn't toast, just sits beside him and says, "I blink when it matters." That night, nothing happens. No threats, no gunplay. But every man in the room knows they've just watched two lions circle each other, and both walked away intact. For now, the Colombo family leadership is still officially in the hands of Joe Colombo himself, but everyone senses the future belongs to someone else. Carmine never pushes, never campaigns, but he becomes the one younger soldiers ask advice from, the one older captains go to when they need a situation cooled off. He doesn't volunteer wisdom. He waits until it's requested. And as for his personal life, it's nearly invisible. Married, with children, yes. But no photos, no parties, no affectionate quotes. He keeps family separate. His son, Alphonse, nicknamed Alley Boy, is young now. But Carmine already watches him with the same calculating eye he turns on rivals. Not out of suspicion, out of protection, because Persico knows what's coming. The FBI is sharpening its tools. The RICO Act is being fine-tuned. Wiretaps are now the mob's boogeyman. Informants, once rare, now multiplying like shadows. The Mafia world is shifting, and a man's greatest asset is no longer his gun. It's his ability to disappear in plain sight. So Carmine adapts again. He becomes more selective with his meetings. He skips weddings, skirts wakes, communicates through intermediaries. Sometimes he even arranges double blinds. He tells a man to pass a message to another, not knowing that both men report back to him. He's creating a web, not a crew, a structure. And at the center of it, coiled and quiet, is the snake. Many people still argue about this phase of Persico's rise. Was he laying the groundwork for a hostile takeover? Or was he simply being cautious in a time when caution was survival? So what do you think? Was this tactical restraint or slow-motion conquest? Either way, the pieces are moving, and one day soon, Carmine Persico won't be whispering from the edge of the table. He'll be sitting at its head. By the late 1960s, Carmine Persico doesn't walk into a room so much as he appears. One moment, there's idle conversation, a little laughter maybe, the clink of glasses, and then a ripple, a hush, and suddenly, he's there. Always calm, always alone, always dressed in gray or navy, never black. It's too dramatic. His shoes are quiet, his voice even quieter. The Colombo family is in a moment of deceptive calm. Joe Colombo holds the official title of boss, and he's making headlines, not with murders or rackets, but with the Italian-American Civil Rights League. A strange move, many think. A mafia boss suddenly leading civil protests? Holding press conferences? Getting airtime? Carmine watches it all from a safe distance. He doesn't trust the spotlight. To him, it's not a shield. It's a magnifying glass. And when you work in shadows, magnifying glasses burn. Colombo's activism puts him on the radar, not just of law enforcement, but of rival bosses. You don't make waves in the Mafia without drawing attention from those who prefer the water still. And when Colombo is shot in 1971, during a rally, no less, it doesn't shock Carmine. If anything, it confirms his belief that loud men die faster. Colombo doesn't die immediately. He lingers, paralyzed and silent, for years. But his leadership is over. The family, for all intents and purposes, is now without a captain. And here begins the delicate dance of succession. This is where Carmine excels. He doesn't declare anything, doesn't rush for power. He waits, coils tighter, lets the panic fill the air while he remains a pillar of composure. His reputation begins to pull weight. Captains defer to him. Soldiers whisper his name with something between fear and reverence. He's not appointed boss, but in many ways, he already is. The Commission, the ruling body of the 5 families, keeps a wary eye on the Colombos during this time. They don't want instability, but they also don't want to interfere unless absolutely necessary. Persico gives them no reason to intervene. He manages tensions quietly. Deals are kept. Rackets remain profitable. No bodies surface, at least not publicly. And then comes the sit-down in Bensonhurst, a minor conflict on paper. A dispute over a hijacked truck carrying designer suits, as mundane as mafia business gets. But the truck is valuable, the timing delicate, and the crews involved have short tempers. Carmine calls for a meeting. The warehouse where it's held is unremarkable. Dusty windows, the smell of old oil and newer lies. The captains argue, throw accusations, puff their chests. Carmine listens, doesn't speak until they've tired themselves out. Then he walks to a chalkboard, picks up a piece of white chalk, draws a quick sketch, just lines and arrows, nothing elaborate. He maps out the routes, the timing, the logistics. No one interrupts. When he finishes, he says, "This is how it happened. The truck was ours, but you'll get a cut, because peace is cheaper than war." No one argues. He erases the board, says nothing more. The meeting ends. Later, one of the captains tells a soldier, "It wasn't the chalk. It was the way he held it, like it could have been a knife." Persico's power continues to grow not through declarations, but through moments like this. Efficiency, clarity, authority. He doesn't demand respect. He renders it inevitable. Around this time, federal investigators begin to take greater interest in him. His name appears more frequently in surveillance logs. Wiretaps pick up hushed references. The guy, our friend, the quiet one. But no one says his name. Not directly. Not often. Even in whispers, his presence is an absence. He's elusive. A ghost in the machine. Always one layer removed. When he does speak on a phone, it's in code. Pick up the flowers means deliver the cash. The plumber's late means the payment's light. It's not poetry, but it's enough to keep the feds guessing. One agent writes in a report, "Persico doesn't just avoid detection, he refuses it. Still, the pressure is mounting. The FBI is growing more sophisticated. The RICO Act, passed in 1970, is beginning to bite. Prosecutors are learning how to dismantle entire criminal organizations, not just arrest foot soldiers. and Carmine knows it. He adjusts again. Fewer meetings, more intermediaries. He begins grooming a small circle of absolute loyalists, men who owe their rise entirely to him. These are not just soldiers. They're extensions of his will. One of them, an old-school guy named Big Jimmy, is once heard saying, "Carmine doesn't need to raise his voice. He just looks at you like he already knows what you're going to do and why you'll regret it." And yet, despite his reputation, Carmine maintains a certain equilibrium. He's not cruel. He's not flashy. He operates with the precision of someone who knows that fear wears off. But order lingers. Around this same time, a minor headline runs in the New York Daily News. An unnamed mob figure is implicated in a labor union corruption case. No charges are filed. But insiders know the article's ghost is Carmine Persico. He's not even listed, but the fingerprints are there. Many people still think he orchestrated the whole operation. A multi-layered scheme involving inflated invoices, dummy construction companies, and fake payroll employees who mysteriously collect pension benefits. So what do you think? Genius racketeer, or just a man too careful to catch? Either way, Carmine learns a lesson here. The walls are getting closer. The spotlight might never land directly on him, but the heat is rising. So he makes another move. He tightens his world. He begins operating through a proxy. Officially, Joseph Iacovelli is named acting boss. But everyone knows the truth. Iacovelli takes orders from Persico, often passed through 2 intermediaries, sometimes 3. It's convoluted. It's deliberate. It's safe. And this is where Persico earns the quiet awe of his peers, not just for surviving, but for thriving in chaos. While other bosses fall to bullets or indictments, Carmine stays coiled, just far enough from the fire to stay warm, but never burned. It's around this time that whispers begin in the other families. Why hasn't he taken the title? Why keep hiding in the shadows? Is he scared or just smarter than us? The answer, of course, depends on who you ask. To the old-timers, Carmine is a throwback, a man who values control over glory. To the younger guys, he's a mystery, a figure more myth than man. And to the feds, he's a name they can't quite nail down. But the time for shadows is ending. The family is restless. The other capos are watching. The commission is sniffing around. Sooner or later, Carmine Persico will have to step into the light. The question is, will the light reveal a leader? Or something colder? Something coiled? Something ready? The early 1970s are a strange, flickering decade. Tie-dyes in the parks, Watergate on TV, disco in the air. But down in the underbelly of Brooklyn, nothing really changes. Envelopes still pass hands. Unions still get leaned on. Trucks still vanish just before dawn. And behind the careful orchestration of so much quiet movement stands Carmine Persico, coiled tighter than ever. Joe Colombo's shooting has left the family in limbo. Officially, Colombo remains the boss, his name still whispered with reverence or caution, depending on the room. But everyone knows the reality. The man is bedridden, paralyzed, and practically silent. And nature, especially in organized crime, abhors a vacuum. While other ambitious captains posture for succession, Persico doesn't flinch. He's already moving behind the scenes, installing loyalists into key positions. Iacovelli remains the figurehead, yes, but every directive, from collections to sit-downs to contract decisions, flows from Persico. And everyone in the family knows it, even if they pretend not to. But there's a subtle difference now. Carmine is no longer just a tactician. He's now playing at something bigger. Dynasty. Longevity. Not just controlling power, but preserving it across time. It's not just about staying on top. It's about making sure no one else even knows what the top looks like anymore. Around this time, the infamous pizza connection starts gaining traction, an international heroin distribution ring hidden behind pizzerias and tomato sauce. While Persico isn't directly tied to the scheme, many believe he understands the value of keeping his hands in the flour. Quietly, he allows certain Colombos to skim profits off the operation. Just enough to stay included, not enough to draw attention. It's always the same pattern with Carmine. Watch, wait, insert influence without invitation. If he were a chess piece, he wouldn't be the king or the knight. He'd be the board itself, but even the best serpents can't slither without occasionally brushing steel. In 1972, the FBI gets its first real shot at him. They arrest Carmine on federal loan sharking charges, part of a broader crackdown intended to decapitate the Colombo hierarchy. It's not his first arrest, but it's more serious than anything prior. This time, they think they've got teeth on bone. He's held at the Metropolitan Correctional Center. No tailored suits here, no gray overcoats, just drab cotton and institutional lights. Yet even inside, he holds presence. Guards report he speaks little, reads constantly, and makes no complaints. Fellow inmates say he's respectful, but distant. One even says he looked like he was already planning his next 5 years just in case. While inside, Carmine refuses to discuss family business, not with other inmates, not with visitors. Conversations are limited to weather, books, and vague jokes about Italian cooking. When asked if the food is any good, he once reportedly answered, "Only if you've never been to Brooklyn." The trial, when it arrives, is quiet but tense. Prosecutors bring in accountants, wiretaps, and reams of paperwork. But Persico's name dances through it all like smoke. Nothing sticks. The jury deliberates for days. And then, acquittal. He walks out of court in a cheap suit, buttons his coat, and disappears into a black sedan. That same week, the Colombo family quietly realigns. Old alliances fade. New money gets new bosses. But the center of gravity doesn't shift. It remains in the hands of the man who never needed a title to give orders. By 1973, the commission begins to acknowledge the truth. Carmine Persico is the de facto boss of the Colombo family. Not acting boss, not street boss, just boss. He never announces it, never throws a party. But messages start arriving with his name at the top. Meetings are scheduled with him directly, and when issues arise within the family, everyone waits to see what he thinks before picking sides. But the streets remember the way he got here. They remember the way he turned on the gallows, the way he neutralized Colombo loyalists, the way he ran operations through proxies and smokescreens. And in certain corners of Bensonhurst and Flatbush, people start whispering a new version of his nickname. Not the Snake for how he slithers, but the Snake for how he squeezes. Because once Carmine Persico wraps himself around a situation, there's no air left. This growing perception comes to a head in 1974 when a union dispute turns violent. A Colombo associate, unhappy with the way a trucking contract is being handled, threatens to take his grievance to a rival family. It's a rookie mistake. Within days, the associate is gone. Just gone. No body, no car, no blood. Many people still think Persico arranged the disappearance not to punish the man, but to remind others that questions should stay inside the family. So what do you think? Was it a tactical silencing or a necessary reminder? Either way, the message lands, loudly. Yet, for all his caution, Carmine makes one critical mistake. He underestimates just how badly the FBI wants to take him down. See, law enforcement is adapting too. They've begun linking crimes through paper trails. tying violent acts to financial ones. And most of all, they've begun targeting the structure, not just the individuals. The RICO Act is the hammer, and Persico is now officially on the anvil. His phone lines are tapped. His associates are followed. One low-level soldier, facing drug charges, flips. Then another. Then a union official. The dam isn't breaking yet, but it's groaning. Carmine doesn't panic. He begins minimizing face-to-face meetings, starts passing messages through coded ledgers. Once, during a wiretapped call, he talks about a weather delay in Chicago. The feds think he's talking about a plane. It's actually code for a late shipment of stolen bonds. Still, the pressure's undeniable, so he does something bold. In 1975, he officially takes the title of boss. No more proxies, no more acting labels. Carmine Persico is now the recognized head of the Colombo family, sanctioned by the commission, acknowledged by the street, and instantly promoted to the top tier of every FBI most wanted file. It's not celebration he wants, it's consolidation. He restructures the family, promotes lieutenants he trusts, silently sidelines those who've grown too loud or too ambitious. He brings his son, Alphonse, Alley Boy, into tighter circles, not as a favor, as a move. Dynasty. Remember, he starts grooming Alley the way a craftsman sharpens a blade. Slowly, quietly, with full intent. Carmine knows what's coming. He always has. And as the decade darkens, his posture shifts, just slightly. Not the coiled stillness of a snake waiting to strike, but the steady pressure of one that already has. By 1976, Carmine Persico has something most mob bosses only dream of: absolute control, without ever having to raise his voice. He's now officially the boss of the Colombo family, and yet to the untrained eye, you'd still think he was a quiet figure in the corner of the club, sipping espresso and counting raindrops on the window. There are no processions, no power displays, just a network so tightly wound around him that even if you cut it in half, both sides would still report to him. He maintains this balance with a delicate rhythm, not just through violence, though when necessary, it arrives with surgical precision, but through memory. Carmine remembers debts, slights, favors, names. He remembers which captain's daughter needed hospital bills covered, and which soldier's mother got a proper burial because of an envelope he slipped through the church door. These things matter in this world, and no one keeps score better than the snake. But not everyone is content with this quiet reign. Joe Gallo's ghost still hovers in the margins of the Colombo family's story. And even years after Crazy Joe was shot dead in a Manhattan clam house, the aftershocks of his rebellion still pulse beneath the surface. Some of the old Gallo loyalists, now older, quieter, but no less bitter, harbor resentment. They smile at Carmine in meetings, but they flinch when he walks by. And then there's the newer blood, younger guys, raised on the edge of old-school traditions and newer street realities, start pushing boundaries. They're less disciplined, more impulsive. Some don't even remember a time when Persico wasn't boss. They mistake his quiet for softness. They learn fast. One such soldier, Vincent Little Vinny Maglione, makes a poor decision. He's supposed to handle collections from a chain of vending machine operators skimming off the top. Simple job. Instead, he roughs up a guy in broad daylight in front of witnesses. Worse, the guy's got an uncle in the NYPD. Carmine hears about it by lunch. By sunset, Vinny's out. Not dead, just gone. Reassigned to Florida. No crew, no income, no respect. The message is clear. You make Carmine visible. You make yourself disappear. Still, Persico isn't just reacting to bad behavior, he's planning for survival. His leadership is marked by containment. He sees threats not as explosions to avoid, but as leaks to plug before the flood. When tensions rise between the Colombo family and the Lucchese's over a disputed trucking contract in New Jersey, Carmine doesn't threaten. He proposes a dinner. The sit-down takes place at a seafood joint on the waterfront. Neutral ground. Inside, the captains talk, posture, debate. Carmine eats shrimp scampi and says almost nothing. At the end of the meal, he simply says, "Let them have the route. We'll take the freight yard." The other families nod. The Lucchese's get what they want. But 6 months later, Persico's men quietly secure 3 union contracts tied to that freight yard, worth triple what the route ever brought in. A chess player, always. But there's a ticking clock. Federal prosecutors are tightening their focus. The Colombo family is under more surveillance than ever before. Wires in clubs, bugs in cars, cameras pointed from rooftops across Bensonhurst. And worst of all, informants, rats, snitches, guys once sworn to Omerta now wearing wires beneath their members-only jackets. One of these, a minor bookie named Frank Zip Ziccarelli, gets picked up on gambling charges. Facing real time, he flips. It's small stuff at first. Names, schedules. But it's enough to give the feds a skeleton key. For the first time, they start understanding the structure of the Colombo family. Not just the crimes, but the hierarchy. Carmine knows it, and so he starts talking less, delegating more. He instructs captains to communicate through buffers, trusted intermediaries with no criminal records and no affiliations. He even alters the rhythm of his days. No more set routines. He changes routes to meetings, stops visiting social clubs as frequently. If someone wants to see him, they better have 3 things: a reason, an appointment, and a clean record. But still, the walls are moving in. In 1978, a grand jury begins investigating Colombo union activity tied to construction fraud, trucking embezzlement, and pension fund laundering. Carmine's name comes up. Not directly. Never directly. But the evidence is forming like storm clouds. Many people still think this is when he made his most controversial internal decision, placing full trust in his son, Alphonse Alleyboy Persico. Alley is bright, sharp, but green. And not every member of the family is thrilled with the idea of dynastic succession. This isn't Camelot. It's Coney Island with silencers. Merit matters. Bloodlines don't always buy loyalty. Still, Carmine doesn't force the issue. He simply begins folding Alley into more business, bringing him to meetings, giving him a voice, watching how others respond. It's less coronation than calculation. One night, after a meeting in Staten Island, an old captain asks Carmine privately, "You really trust the kid?" Carmine replies, "If I didn't, he wouldn't still be breathing." Hard to argue with that. Around this time, whispers reach Persico's ear that the FBI has a new plan, a sweeping prosecution, not of one family, not of one crew, but of all 5 families. A single case that would tie them together like knots in the same rope. The word? The commission case. A nightmare scenario. So what does Carmine do? He retreats, just slightly, begins preparing a second layer of leadership, moves money, tightens circles, stops using phones entirely. And when meetings do occur, they take place in parked cars with the engine running and the radio up, just in case. But even with all this caution, his name is already inked into the prosecutor's notebook. In 1980, Persico is indicted again. Racketeering, labor extortion, loan sharking. The case is stronger than the last one, but still not airtight. He's arrested, booked, and sent to jail pending trial. Yet even from behind bars, his influence doesn't waver. He continues running the family via coded messages passed through lawyers and visitors. His orders are obeyed with the same speed and deference as before. Some say it's because of loyalty. Others say it's because no one dares do otherwise. The prosecutors are stunned. They thought jail would end his reign. Instead, it just gave him thicker walls to operate from. One guard, assigned to his unit, writes later, "He was quiet, never angry, never loud. But when he looked at you, it was like he could see your badge number and your funeral flowers all at once." So what do you think? Was this just Persico's final act of survival? Or was he always planning to rule from inside a cage? Either way, the pattern holds. The more you try to corner Carmine, the more invisible he becomes. The bars clang shut behind him. But for Carmine Persico, they don't echo defeat. If anything, they sound like punctuation. The sentence may be long, but the command continues, sharp, clipped, and obeyed. It's 1980. He's in a federal detention facility, awaiting trial for racketeering and conspiracy. To most, it looks like a death knell, but to those who really know how this world turns, it's just a new address for the same office, because Persico doesn't stop being the boss when locked up. He just becomes a different kind of boss, one who speaks less and means more, one who doesn't move through Brooklyn streets, but still shifts the weight of decisions across boroughs. It's around now that his legend deepens, not because he's active, but because he isn't. Orders are passed through an invisible maze. Attorneys, relatives, visitors who say little but wear expressions of gravity. It's not what they say. It's what they were told not to say. Carmine doesn't need a phone. He doesn't need a voice. His absence carries instruction. From his cell, he controls extortion rackets, construction kickbacks, loan sharking operations, and labor disputes. His capos continue earning. His soldiers continue reporting. And any murmurs of succession, any whispers that maybe someone else should take over while the boss is on ice, vanish before they finish forming. In fact, one such murmur, allegedly muttered by a younger captain in Queens, is cut off mid-sentence when the man is reassigned to a crew in Buffalo. A polite exile, a cold reminder. Now, Persico knows all this can't last forever. The legal weight bearing down on him is enormous, and the prosecutors have evolved. This isn't the old game of he said, she said. This is the RICO era. They're not just charging crimes. They're building stories, long, winding narratives that tie Persico not to single acts of violence, but to the functioning of a criminal empire. One agent refers to Carmine as the linchpin of structural corruption, a phrase Persico will later call boring, but not inaccurate. But in the midst of these mounting legal battles, Carmine makes a move that surprises even his allies. He decides to represent himself in court. That's right. The snake fires his lawyers. The press is stunned. Defense attorneys across New York shake their heads. A suicide mission, some call it. Hubris, others whisper. But Persico, sitting at the defense table in his prison khakis, offers no explanation. What he does do is remarkable. He studies legal texts, court transcripts, prosecutorial memos. He turns his cell into a miniature law library. When court is in session, he's calm, articulate, even at times, charismatic. He refers to himself in the third person, cross-examines witnesses with unnerving patience, and builds his arguments with the same deliberate calculation he used to map hijacking routes. He challenges government narratives, dissects FBI wiretap summaries, casts doubt on witnesses, particularly those with immunity deals. He's not just defending himself, He's teaching the courtroom how Carmine Persico wants to be remembered. One day during cross-examination, a government informant testifies that Persico ordered a hit via coded message from prison. Carmine stands, adjusts his glasses, and says, "Sir, did this message have my name on it? My signature? Or just the shape you imagined fit me best?" It's a line that makes the papers. One journalist calls it a snake charming the system. Still, the evidence is heavy. Tapes, paper trails, testimonies. The prosecution is relentless. And while Persico's defense is impressive, the tide is too strong. In 1986, after a trial that lasts months and holds the attention of nearly every major paper in New York, Carmine Persico is convicted as part of the commission case, a landmark federal prosecution aimed at dismantling the ruling bodies of the 5 families. The sentence, 139 years. To some, it's a death sentence wrapped in bureaucracy. To Carmine, it's simply a new perimeter. The commission case sends shockwaves through organized crime. Other bosses crumble, flee, or vanish. But Persico remains, not just alive, but active. He accepts the sentence, doesn't appeal with much effort, doesn't complain. He's transferred to USP Lompoc, then later to other federal penitentiaries across the country. Each time, he sets up quietly, books, letters, a small bed, a smaller table. But here's the chilling part. He's still in charge. The Colombos remain loyal. Orders flow. Money moves. Promotions happen. Rivalries simmer. And all of it trickles back to the man in the cell with the wire-frame glasses and the soft Brooklyn drawl. At one point, the FBI intercepts a letter written in code. It talks about moving the furniture and restoring the wallpaper. They crack the code, eventually. It's about rearranging crew territories and consolidating union influence. So what do you think? Is this desperation? Or a man who never learned how to not lead? Even the feds acknowledge his reach. One memo describes Persico as an example of leadership so entrenched, incarceration barely slows it. Meanwhile, inside prison, Carmine adapts. He becomes known as a quiet but steady figure. Keeps to himself, reads, writes, helps other inmates draft letters to family. Once, he even settles a dispute between 2 rival inmates, not with threats, but with logic and memory. He tells one, "You borrowed cigarettes from him 4 times. You only paid twice. If you call that even. I've been doing math wrong my whole life." He smiles. The issue dissolves. Outside, the Colombo family begins to fracture. Without their boss physically present, the younger generation grows restless. Factions form. Blood is spilled. The Second Colombo War looms. Carmine watches it unfold through letters and coded phone calls. And even then, he refuses to loosen his grip, because the snake didn't slither this far to vanish. He coiled to stay ready. And if he has to rule from a cage, then that cage will become a throne. By the late 1980s, the name Carmine Persico has drifted from street corners to federal files to whispered phone calls. He's serving a 139-year sentence in a federal penitentiary, convicted in one of the most sweeping mob trials in U.S. history, the commission case. And yet, in the very world meant to confine him, Carmine doesn't shrink. He reorganizes. From inside a cell that measures barely 10 feet wide, he exerts power over a criminal enterprise that still hums in the streets of New York. This is the paradox of Carmine Persico. The less visible he becomes, the deeper his influence seeps. Now, let's paint a picture. He sits at a narrow desk, concrete walls pressing in on either side. A single overhead bulb casts shadows like iron bars across yellowed paper. A radio hums softly in the background. Sometimes Sinatra, sometimes silence, On the table, letters, coded notes, a worn paperback copy of The Prince by Machiavelli. His writing hand is steady, his tone unhurried. Every directive is measured. Nothing rushed, nothing emotional. Because a man who rules from a cage doesn't get second chances, and outside that cage, the Colombo family is splintering. In Carmine's absence, ambitious captains begin jostling for influence. Victor Little Vic Orina, initially appointed acting boss by Persico himself, starts entertaining thoughts of permanence. Orina has charisma, ambition, and support from several key crews. But most of all, he has space. Carmine is behind bars. Orina is not. And in a world where FaceTime equals force, that distinction starts to matter. At first, the rift is polite. Quiet differences, slight delays in following orders, questions asked one layer too many times. But soon, whispers become schemes, and schemes become declarations. Orina begins positioning himself not as acting boss, but as the boss. For a man like Persico, this isn't just betrayal, it's mutiny, and mutiny requires correction. From behind his prison walls, Carmine does something remarkable. He wages a war, not with armies, with decisions. He instructs loyal captains to isolate Orina's supporters, cut off money flows, redirect loan sharking revenue, cancel union deals under Orina's control. In simple terms, starve the rebellion. It doesn't work fast enough. In 1991, the rift explodes into what becomes known as the Second Colombo War, a bloody internal conflict that rocks the family to its core. Street shootouts, daylight ambushes, hits in front of homes, bakeries, even playgrounds. Over a dozen men killed, dozens more wounded. The FBI scrambles to contain it, but they're mostly spectators. And all the while, Persico remains caged, but not powerless. He continues giving orders. Not always directly, often through Alley Boy, his son, now serving as his street-level proxy. It's a dangerous mantle to carry. Alphonse Persico is intelligent and loyal, but every move he makes is a reflection of the father whose approval looms like a silent storm cloud. One moment that defines this dynamic comes in a letter Carmine writes to a trusted captain. The message is simple, but chilling in its clarity. Loyalty is not shown in how you fight, but who you refuse to stand beside. Translation: if you're with Orina, you're not just wrong, you're disposable. Eventually, the war takes its toll. The FBI capitalizes on the chaos, arresting both sides, offering deals to the wounded, and stacking charges high enough to blot out sunlight. Orina is arrested, tried, and convicted. The rebellion dies, not with a bullet, but with a sentence. Persico has won, again, but the victory costs more than power. It costs structure. The Colombo family, once known for its quiet efficiency, now bleeds instability. Trust erodes. Young soldiers look up and see leadership defined not by respect, but by survival. And law enforcement tightens its grip. Carmine doesn't flinch. Instead, he doubles down. He reasserts his role from behind bars with a quiet tenacity that stuns even his enemies. He reorganizes crews, distributes territory, offers promotions with cold logic, not affection. And he tells Allie, firmly, that the family must evolve. One such evolution? Tighter financial management. Carmine begins insisting on cleaner fronts, garbage disposal companies, light construction, even vending machine routes. He's not pretending to go legit. He's layering protection, like insulation in a burning house. Still, law enforcement adapts too. By 1995, a wave of new charges is being assembled against key Colombo figures. Wiretaps, cooperating witnesses, shell corporations traced back to made men. It's a machine now, an industrial prosecution effort. And at the center of nearly every chart, every org diagram, every red-circled photo is Carmine Persico. The feds can't reach him again. He's already serving life, but they want his empire. They start flipping soldiers, flipping union reps, even flipping wives. But Carmine adjusts once more. He strips down communication. Orders are passed face-to-face only. Some messages are sent through legal mail, difficult to monitor without a warrant. And his most sensitive decisions? They're not even written down. They're spoken once, and then never repeated. A federal agent interviewed years later said, "Persico was like a ghost. You'd feel the impact before you ever knew he'd moved." Meanwhile, Alley Boy's role expands. He's now the public face of the family, the voice in sit-downs, the signature on fronts, but he's always reporting back. Every move is reviewed, critiqued, sometimes undone. Carmine trusts him, but he doesn't worship him. He sees Alley as an instrument, a tool in the hand of someone who can no longer physically reach the chessboard. Still, many within the organization begin to question the succession. They wonder, how long can you serve a king you never see? How many orders can you obey before the silence feels like absence? Many people still think this is where Carmine made his second most fateful decision. Not just keeping power, but insisting it stay in the bloodline. So what do you think? Was it legacy or hubris? The whispers swirl, but no one moves against him. Not again. Not after what happened to Arena, because if there's one truth about snakes, it's this. They don't need to strike often. Just once, clean, final, and remembered. And Carmine Persico? He's still remembered, still ruling, still coiled. By the late 1990s, Carmine Persico is no longer just a name in courtrooms or FBI files. He's an idea, a presence. For a man who hasn't touched Brooklyn pavement in nearly 2 decades, his reach is astonishing. From a federal prison cell, surrounded by gray walls and fluorescent silence, he continues to steer the Colombo family like a captain whose ship is always moving, even if no one sees the wheel turn. His daily routine inside the penitentiary is deceptively calm. He wakes early, reads, writes letters, takes slow walks in the rec yard, rarely speaks unless spoken to. But even in that quiet, there's gravity. Inmates, guards, even the chaplain, everyone knows that Carmine Persico is different. Not just because he's been there so long, but because his power never seems to dim. And outside those walls, the world is racing forward. The Mafia is no longer the untouchable force it once was. Federal racketeering cases have taken down legends. The streets are full of guys trying to fill shoes they don't quite fit into. The Camorra in Italy is changing. The Russian mob is rising. Even the neighborhood codes are eroding. Kids sell drugs openly now, where once such activity was taboo under traditional mob rules. Carmine watches the landscape shift like a weatherman studying a slow-moving storm. He doesn't panic. He recalculates. He begins focusing more heavily on sustainability. That's the word he uses, according to one former Colombo captain who later flipped. Persico's new philosophy wasn't just about keeping the family alive. It was about keeping it relevant. He tightens finances again, consolidates extortion routes, shuts down unproductive rackets. If a crew isn't pulling its weight, it's dissolved. If a soldier gets pinched and talks too much, he disappears, not necessarily violently, but bureaucratically, stripped of rank, removed from earnings, frozen out like a ghost. But here's where it gets fascinating. Despite everything, the prison sentence, the bloodshed, the infighting, Carmine never lets go of the human side of leadership. He still sends condolence notes to families of fallen soldiers, still pays tuition for the niece of a trusted capo, still remembers birthdays. These gestures, while small, mean everything in a culture where loyalty often hangs by threads of respect. It's these details that keep him from becoming a relic. They make him personal in a business increasingly impersonal. And then comes one of the strangest chapters in his saga. In 1999, federal prosecutors open another investigation. This time, it targets Alphonse "Alley Boy" Persico, Carmine's son. The accusation? That Alley, acting under his father's orders, orchestrated the murder of William Cutolo, a rising Colombo underboss who many believed was poised to challenge the Persico legacy. The murder is clinical. Cutolo disappears after a meeting. No body, no blood, just silence. It takes years before investigators piece together what likely happened. And in that silence, speculation grows. Some say Cutolo was getting too ambitious. Others say he was too friendly with outsiders. But many believe, still, that the decision to eliminate him didn't come from Alley. It came from the cell, from Carmine. So what do you think? Was this the last necessary defense of a crumbling dynasty, or a father asking too much of a son? Either way, it marks a turning point. In 2001, Alley Boy is indicted for racketeering. In 2004, he's hit again, this time with a murder charge for Cutolo's death. The trial is ugly. Wiretaps, flipped witnesses, legal maneuvering. And through it all, Carmine stays silent. He never testifies, never speaks to the press, never confirms or denies, but he feels it. Those close to him, guards, other inmates, say his walks became slower, his appetite dulled. He stopped writing as many letters, not out of fear, out of disappointment. Because no matter how he positioned the pieces, the board always had one flaw. You can't shield someone from a storm you caused. Still, even in this turmoil, the Colombo family doesn't collapse. It fragments, it shrinks, but it endures. Because Carmine Persico has built something more than hierarchy. He's built habit. He's built habit. A rhythm. A way of doing things that lingers even when the man himself fades from view. His rules, his codes, his style. One Colombo associate, arrested in 2007, tells prosecutors, "We still do things the way the old man wanted. You don't have to ask if it's his way. You just know." By now, Carmine is nearly 75. His hair has thinned. His walk is slower. But his mind, still razor sharp. He reviews case law for recreation. Keeps a rotating list of who's earning, who's slipping, and who's making noise in the other families. He reads the Wall Street Journal daily. Not because he invests, but because the market tells him who's scared, and he still maintains that central rule. Speak less than you know. Listen more than they expect. A young inmate once tries to spark conversation in the rec yard. "They say you're the godfather," he says, half joking. Carmine just smiles. "They say a lot of things," he replies without looking up, and the kid never asks again. Inside the Mafia world, Carmine has become a kind of haunting. Even guys in other families, Genovese, Gambino, Bonanno, refer to him like a monument. The kind of figure you mention, not challenge. Because to challenge a ghost, that's asking to disappear. Many people still believe that if Persico had retired, walked away, handed off control, maybe the Colombo family would have avoided its bloodiest years. But that's not how snakes operate. They don't uncoil when danger passes. They stay wrapped until they stop breathing. And Carmine Persico? Not done yet. The calendar flips to the 2010s, and somewhere deep within the Bureau of Prison System, Carmine Persico rises from his narrow cot as if nothing has changed, as if decades haven't passed. as if the world outside his concrete box hasn't evolved beyond anything the old bosses could have imagined. Smartphones, social media, facial recognition, encrypted apps. The Mafia world he once dominated with whispers and handwritten notes now trembles under the glare of surveillance so precise it can track a man's pulse from a mile away. And yet, he still has pull, not like before. Not the kind of power that sends shivers through whole burrows, but presence. Weight. In the Colombo family, his word is still sacred, his legacy still enforced, his routines are still studied, even mimicked by younger guys hoping to pick up a little of that ancient steel. But more importantly, his silence still matters. You see, when most old mobsters reach the twilight years, they talk. They publish memoirs, appear in documentaries, offer sanitized versions of their stories in exchange for legacy or absolution. Carmine? Not a word. Not to interviewers, not to agents, not to authors dangling seven-figure book deals, not even to friendly priests with the offer of confession. He keeps his silence the way most men keep breath. And that silence echoes. The Colombo family, by now, is a fractured reflection of what it used to be. Smaller crews, less influence, tighter budgets. The FBI has done its job well. Raids, indictments, plea deals. But the thing that keeps it alive, that keeps some version of order intact, is structure. The very thing Carmine enforced for half a century. It's in the way sit-downs are still done with one spokesman per crew. It's in the way new earners are vetted 3 times over. It's in the way no one ever says his name on a phone. Because even now, in old age, with failing health and fading eyesight, Carmine Persico is still treated like he's listening. One former associate tells a reporter off the record, "There are rules you just don't break. Not even now. Not even if he's never coming out. Because what if he does?" At this point, Carmine has been in prison for over 25 years. That's longer than the average American marriage, longer than the Cold War, longer than some of his soldiers have been alive. And still, he writes, not commands, not threats, just observations. He pens long letters to close family members, filled with reflections on history, politics, even theology. One inmate recalls seeing Carmine reading a thick volume on Roman law. When asked why, Carmine reportedly said, "Because they ruled the world from a senate. I ruled mine from a cafeteria table." Was he joking? Maybe, but no one laughed. Still, behind the myth, there is a man. He begins to suffer from heart issues, arthritis. He walks slower now, often with a slight stoop. He avoids the yard on cold mornings. He eats less, sleeps more. The sharpness remains, but the frame that carries it has dulled with time. Even his enemies, what few remain, start to speak of him with something bordering on respect. One FBI agent, retired now, says in a 2014 podcast, "We could never break Persico. Not really. We got his friends. We got his soldiers. We took down the family, more or less. But him? He never gave us what we wanted most. Himself." Many people still wonder if Persico regrets not stepping down, not handing off the throne to someone with fresh legs and a lighter rap sheet. Some argue he let the family rot from within. Others say he kept it alive when everyone else would have abandoned ship. So, what do you think? Did he preserve tradition, or did he chain it to his cell? In 2016, a rare piece of personal writing by Carmine is smuggled out. Just a few lines, scribbled on a torn envelope. It reads, "Men like me don't retire. We fade where we're told, like ink on a page someone keeps rereading." And in that sentence lies the whole story, because what Carmine Persico built was never just about money, or fear, or reputation. It was about order, a system that endured even as its architect vanished into cinder-block walls and fluorescent daylight. He didn't crave applause. He didn't want a statue. He wanted memory. And memory, as it turns out, is harder to kill than men. In the late-night hum of a federal prison, somewhere between the buzz of flickering lights and the clatter of metal gates, Carmine Persico walks the edge of memory. Not because he's lost it, but because he's preserving it, like a careful curator dusting off relics no one else remembers how to read. By 2018, Persico is 85 years old. He's lived long enough to see entire generations of wise guys rise, fall, flip, and vanish. The neighborhood kids who once ran errands for made men now run real estate firms or tech startups. Social clubs are boarded up or turned into coffee shops. The corner where he once stood in silence now sells organic candles. But inside the wire, he still carries weight. New inmates, especially those with ties to the street, treat him like something between a legend and a cautionary tale. Some try to talk to him. Some can't even make eye contact. Others just nod respectfully from a distance. He no longer needs to speak to command the room. He just is, and yet the world around him continues to shrink. Many of his old allies are gone, some dead, others flipped and placed in witness protection, their faces different, their names erased. His son, Alley Boy, remains imprisoned as well, convicted of murder and racketeering, sentenced to life. A dynasty, caged. A name, still spoken in reverent tones, but mostly among ghosts. Still, Carmine holds fast to a routine. Up before dawn, writes longhand, legal pads filled with observations, old memories, and the occasional note to family. He eats modestly, keeps to himself, speaks only when necessary, but the machine that once moved so fluidly under his command is now rusting. The Colombo family is a fraction of what it was. The remaining crews are cautious, fragmented, and reluctant to make noise, not out of fear of law enforcement, but out of reverence. As long as he's alive, no one dares fill his shoes, because Persico wasn't just a boss. He became the idea of a boss, and ideas don't retire. They wait, they haunt. But even icons wear down. In early 2019, word spreads that Carmine's health is failing. Heart complications, shortness of breath, frequent fatigue, a slow, steady slide downward. And then the unthinkable happens. February 7, 2019, Carmine Persico dies. He passes away in Duke University Medical Center, Durham, North Carolina, thousands of miles and a lifetime away from the cracked sidewalks of Carroll Street. He was serving his 139-year sentence until the end. No deals, no testimony, no release. The man who ruled from behind bars for more than 3 decades, who navigated wars and wiretaps with equal ease, who watched his enemies bury themselves, was gone. And the silence that follows? Deafening. There's no parade, no massive funeral, no grand tribute. Just quiet memorials among old friends and fading photographs. But in certain corners of the underworld, quiet bars in Staten Island, union halls in Jersey, diners in Queens, his name is whispered with something that sounds like awe. He never gave them anything. He died on his terms, not many left like him, but there's something else. Relief, because as long as Carmine was alive, the Colombo family could not truly move forward, couldn't rebrand, couldn't reorganize. He was both the spine and the ceiling. With him gone, a new chapter could begin, but only if the shadows of his rules were willing to lift. The question is, can they? Because many people still believe Carmine left more than instructions behind. He left expectations on how to lead, on how to remain loyal, on how to vanish when needed, and most of all, how to never explain yourself. So what do you think? Was Carmine Persico a relic of a dying world, or the last proof that old power never really dies. In the months following his death, FBI agents watch closely. They expect chaos, turf disputes, assassinations. But instead, they get quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't mean peace, but planning, because the system Carmine built wasn't based on shouting. It was based on waiting. A new generation rises. They don't talk much. They don't wear flashy suits. They don't seek headlines, but they remember. They remember the man who ran a family from a prison desk, who fought a war through letters, who faced down the government's biggest case and never blinked. And in those memories, Carmine Persico doesn't just endure. He remains. In the stillness after Carmine Persico's death, the underworld pauses. Not in mourning, but in calculation. Because when a figure like Persico disappears, the vacuum left behind is not simply in hierarchy, it's in memory. His silence, his precision, his sheer longevity created an aura so complete that even his enemies had to build their strategies in shadow. But now, for the first time in over half a century, there's no snake watching the board, and so the remaining pieces start to move. The Colombo family, now reduced to a lean cadre of trusted captains and weary earners, begins its slow reorganization. There's no coronation, no press, just a quiet series of sit-downs in dimly lit diners and borrowed apartments. The first order of business. Who steps into the void? And it's here that the echo of Carmine Persico speaks loudest. You see, for all his ruthlessness, all his cold discipline, Persico built a culture, not just a crew. He instilled an operating rhythm that remains in place even without his physical presence. One Colombo elder describes it best. It's like the music keeps playing even though the conductor left the stage. The rules still followed. The codes still quoted. The risks still measured the way he taught. But beyond the family, beyond the whispers in Sheepshead Bay and the walk-ups of Staten Island, the world outside has changed beyond measure. The FBI is no longer just surveilling. They're anticipating. Facial recognition, digital metadata, artificial intelligence. There are no safe havens, no payphones, no leave it under the sink messages. And yet, the machinery of organized crime still grinds on. Smaller, more cautious, but not dead. And Carmine's name, it becomes less a warning and more a standard. A new soldier, barely 30, fresh off a bookmaking racket, is told by his crew chief, "Do it clean, do it quiet, do it the way the old man would have." The soldier nods like he understands. He doesn't. Not really. How could he? He wasn't alive when Persico took the reins. He didn't see the war with Arena. He only knows the stories, the pressure they carry, because that's the thing about legacy. It survives facts, and Carmine's legacy is thick with legend. There's the tale of the prison sit-down, where he resolved a multi-family dispute over Union territory using only 6 words and a nod. There's the story of how he reorganized the family with a set of color-coded legal pads and 3 crossword puzzles, all smuggled back into his cell. There's the rumor that he once stopped a hit simply because the intended victim had a smarter cousin worth keeping around. Are these stories true? Many people still argue. Some swear by them. Others say Persico was just another boss, lucky to survive longer than most. So what do you think? Was his longevity strategy, or survival dressed in cold pragmatism? Here's another whisper. Years before his death, a letter surfaced, allegedly penned by Carmine, though never authenticated. In it, he writes, "A boss doesn't fear the end. He prepares it. One day you wake up and realize your shadow stretches further than your feet ever did." That's classic Persico, blunt, precise, just poetic enough to stick. And stick it does. Even into the 2020s, that quote circulates among street-level earners and old-timers alike. Not because it's profound, but because it explains him. The man who built power not through explosion, but through pressure. A constant slow squeeze of control that shaped not only the Colombo family, but the very style of modern mafia conduct. Because if Carlo Gambino was the ghost of respect, and John Gotti was the ghost of flash, then Carmine Persico was the ghost of endurance, of waiting, of outlasting. He didn't seek the spotlight. He outlived it. And now, in his absence, something fascinating happens. Law enforcement agencies begin studying him more closely, not to indict, but to understand. Criminologists dig into his patterns. Prosecutors quote him in lectures. Documentaries revive the timeline of his rule, pointing not just to his crimes, but his discipline. The way he taught a generation to speak less, move quieter, invest smarter, disappear faster. Even in death, he's instructing. And inside the family, his name is now code for discretion, for control, for never forgetting that the loudest man in the room is usually the one most afraid. One surviving Colombo capo, one of the few who knew Carmine personally, says in a rare interview, he wasn't charming like Gotti. He wasn't adored like Bonanno. He was something else. He was inevitable. And maybe that's the best way to describe him. A force not of charisma or kindness, but inevitability. The man who never flinched, who never flipped, who never quit the board, even when they locked the board away. And now that he's gone, the silence he leaves behind, it hums with pressure. Not noise. Pressure. The kind you feel in your ribs when someone powerful walks into the room, or when their memory refuses to leave it. Some men live on through their deeds, others through stories. But Carmine Persico, he lives on through quiet expectation. An entire institution, weakened but still breathing, carries his rhythm. And in the world of organized crime, rhythm means survival. By 2021, the Colombo family has effectively become a skeleton of its former self. But a skeleton, however stripped down, is still a framework. And much of that framework, still shaped by Carmine's design. The names have changed. The blocky social clubs are shuttered, but the undercurrent remains. Keep your head down, your books clean, and your loyalties clearer than your bank account. And yet, the world has never been less suited to men like Persico. Technology now moves faster than silence. Tracking devices fit inside keychains. Deals are made and betrayed on encrypted apps. Venmo, not envelopes. The muscle of yesteryear is now meaningless against the lens of a camera that never blinks. And the new earners? They're restless. Raised on podcasts and screenplays, they crave the narrative arc, not the discipline. They know the names, Luciano, Gambino, Gotti. But Persico, he's a whispered footnote. But inside certain cells, certain cafes, certain hearts, the whisper still carries weight. Because while everyone talks about how Carmine ruled, what fewer acknowledge is why he ruled as long as he did. The answer? He built a mafia not of fists, but of systems. A system of buffers, codes, ethics twisted for utility, but rules nonetheless. He didn't traffic in chaos. He rationed it, and when chaos came for him, he made order out of a sentence. Think about it. How many men could survive 30 years behind bars while maintaining absolute control over one of the 5 families? Not just survive, but evolve, adapting to each decade, each federal strategy, each betrayal. That's not luck. That's infrastructure. And infrastructure doesn't mourn. It just shifts. In 2022, the Colombo family makes news again. Nothing flashy. a racketeering indictment involving labor fraud and money laundering. The FBI calls it the remnants of a once powerful syndicate. Newspapers say, the last embers of an old fire. But internally, the crew handling the operation traces its chain of command back, layer by layer, to protocols put in place by Persico himself. One agent, during the press briefing, mentions the late Carmine Persico by name. He says, "We believe some of these structures originate from decisions made decades ago." Decades. That's a long time to steer something from the grave. Back inside the wire, those who knew him, what few are still breathing, shake their heads at the idea of his influence fading. One old-timer in Butner whispers, "He left enough blueprints to last another 20 years. And maybe he did, because even now, Carmine is studied. Law students read excerpts from his court defenses, self-taught legal rebuttals more concise than many paid attorneys could deliver. Criminologists dissect his methods. Historians argue over his true legacy. Was he a modern Machiavelli, or simply a man who refused to let go? But in every telling, one truth remains. Carmine Persico was deliberate. He didn't rise on force. He rose on patience. He waited. He listened. He moved when no one expected, and stopped when others ran. He kept score without keeping a ledger. He ruled, not loudly, but lastingly. Even his enemies respected that. One former Bonanno associate, now in witness protection, was once asked who he feared most. Not Gotti, not Cingigante, not the unpredictable street shooters. He answered, "Persico," because he wouldn't warn you. He wouldn't threaten. He'd just act. And you'd never see it coming. Even now, his name is still written on certain FBI threat assessments. Not because he's alive, but because the system he built is. And that system, it teaches a lesson every ambitious street kid should learn. Loud men die, quiet men endure. And Carmine Persico, he endured longer than nearly any of them. From a Carroll Street stoop to a federal cell. From street brawls to courtroom standoffs. From whispered orders to the echoes that still carry his name. Not through myth, but through method. And long after the suits have changed and the streets have blurred and the 5 families become 4, then 3, then maybe something else altogether, the snake's skin still lies in the corner, empty but never forgotten. The wind down of Carmine Persico's story doesn't come with applause. There are no closing curtains, no flash bulbs or courtroom drama, no final statement to the press. Just the long, slow hush that follows the end of something quietly monumental. He dies where he ruled, in silence. No headline could truly capture him. They tried. Mob boss dead at 85. The snake is gone. Colombo patriarch dies in custody. But those are just punctuation marks on a sentence that stretched over half a century, written in invisible ink, and spoken in voices no longer living. In the years following his death, New York changes again. Skyscrapers eat the old skyline. Luxury condos replace the street corners where men once whispered. The social clubs are gone, or painted over. Fewer and fewer remember what a button man was, or why it mattered if he got made on a Thursday. But in some places, the quieter parts of Bensonhurst, the cement shadows of Ozone Park, the faded storefronts in Bay Ridge, Carmine Persico's name still has a tone. It's not awe exactly, more like respect wrapped in caution, like the way you speak of a strict grandfather or a buried minefield, because even in death, Carmine isn't gone. He's paused in a dozen routines, in a dozen silent nods, in the way someone counts change in a back room, in the rhythm of loyalty that doesn't come from fear, but from design. And now, as the lights dim on this long, winding tale, the question is no longer who he was. It's what he left behind. A name, yes. A family, still limping, still breathing. But more than that, a template, on how to last, how to bend without breaking, how to lead without flashing, how to coil so tightly around your purpose that no one can tell where you end and the system begins. Because some men go to prison, others build their throne inside one. So take a breath. Let the streets of Brooklyn fade from your mind. Let the clatter of chains and whispered orders fall quiet. He's gone now, but for a long time, he ruled where others didn't dare speak. And maybe, just maybe, he still does. It's the mid-1980s, and something unprecedented is unfolding in New York. The government, long frustrated by its inability to permanently cripple the Mafia, changes strategy. No more chasing single crimes, lone shooters, or thin trails of cash. This time, they're going after the machine itself. The whole board. The very bones of the 5 families. Enter the commission case, an audacious legal maneuver designed not just to prosecute bosses, but to dismantle the Mafia's entire governance structure. At the heart of it, Carmine Persico. Though he's already in custody on other racketeering charges, Persico's presence looms large in the indictment. The case accuses the ruling bosses of collectively conspiring through the commission, the informal board that mediated disputes, sanctioned hits, and preserved the fragile peace between New York's 5 major crime families. And the government's angle is ruthless. They argue that even without directly committing a murder or extortion, the bosses are guilty by structure, by simply sitting on the commission and benefiting from the crimes committed under their watch. It's like arresting the architect for a house that burned down because he drew the blueprints. Carmine sees the play immediately. This isn't about one case. It's about changing the game. If the commission case sticks, it means no Mafia boss is safe. Ever. Not if they lead. Not if they know. It's a death knell in the form of paperwork. He begins preparing. Though he's already been convicted in another racketeering trial, he's not content to sit idly through this one. In a stunning move, he insists on representing himself again. The courtroom isn't just a stage, it's a battlefield. Persico studies court procedures like he once studied union flows and trucking routes. Every objection, every cross-examination is delivered with the same eerie calm he used in social club sit-downs. He picks apart witnesses, especially those who flipped for immunity deals. He highlights inconsistencies, pauses dramatically, underlines their betrayal not with outrage, but with a kind of mournful detachment. "You were my friend," he tells one during questioning. "So what changed? The years or the numbers?" The jury doesn't laugh. Neither does the witness. Outside the courtroom, the media explodes. Cameras catch Persico walking confidently in his prison khakis, sometimes carrying books, never flanked by guards. To the public, he's a curiosity. To law enforcement, he's a symbol of defiance. But inside the prison system, he's a force. Even while on trial, Persico maintains contact with his lieutenants. Messages are passed through visitors, legal mail, and subtle gestures. One FBI memo notes that while Persico is on trial, Colombo operations appear unaffected. That's not normal. That's structure. But here's the weight of it. The government has built a case with teeth. There are tapes, secret recordings of meetings discussing loan sharking, extortion, even murders. There are financial records, charts, turncoat mobsters spilling decades of secrets, names, places, prices. The commission case isn't flimsy. It's devastating. And Persico? He sees it all coming. Still, he doesn't flinch. His cross-examinations are surgical. His motions sharp. Prosecutors grudgingly admit he's good, not because he's theatrical, but because he knows the world they're trying to describe better than they do. But knowledge can't rewrite reality. In 1986, the verdict drops like thunder. Guilty. Carmine Persico is sentenced to 100 years in federal prison. on top of the decades he's already serving. The courtroom is silent as the sentence is read. No protests, no outbursts. Persico simply nods, adjusts his sleeves, and sits back. What does a man who already rules from prison care about an additional century? In a strange twist, the conviction cements his legend. The media calls it the death of the Mafia, but inside the system, men shake their heads. Persico ain't done, one Colombo soldier mutters in a wire-tapped call. He's just going deeper. And he does, because even from a maximum security cell, Persico continues to steer the ship. Through coded messages, through absolute loyalty, through a network that refuses to bend. Even when he no longer has feet on the pavement, many people still debate whether representing himself was a brilliant act of defiance or a tactical misstep. So what do you think? Should a man like Carmine have let others carry his defense? Or was he always going to face his accusers his own way? Either way, the decision was pure Persico. No delegation, no emotion, just strategy. And now, with the commission dismantled, with the bosses behind bars, and with his own sentence essentially a life wrapped in chains, Carmine Persico begins his longest act of leadership yet. Absolute power. From absolute confinement. If you ever wondered what a man does after being sentenced to 100 years in federal prison on top of his existing term, if you imagined bitterness, silence, or slow surrender, you haven't met Carmine Persico, because in the years following the commission case, Persico doesn't vanish. He sharpens. This phase of his life, his permanent confinement, becomes less of a retreat and more of a fortress, a place not of resignation, but of resolve. Most bosses would be finished. Their influence would wane, their names whispered only in nostalgic corners. But Carmine remains active. He doesn't just survive in prison. He thrives in a way most of his enemies, and even many of his allies, cannot understand. He reads constantly. Not just newspapers, but legal theory, political science, and history. One prison librarian recalls how Carmine once explained the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire using just 2 books and a plastic spoon. He holds informal classes with younger inmates, not lectures, but conversations with weight. Lessons about leverage, loyalty, and how the loudest guy in the room usually leaves first. One younger inmate, in for a fraud charge, later recounts how Carmine asked him flatly, "If your freedom was on the line, would you trust your charm or your math?" It wasn't advice. It was a test. Still, outside the walls, the Colombo family stirs uneasily. After the commission case convictions, many thought the organization would fracture completely. It doesn't. But it does shift. Some crews begin to freelance, loosely aligned with Persico, but growing more interested in short-term profit than long-term structure. Others remain loyal, devoutly so. They communicate through carefully worded letters, meetings with approved attorneys, and occasional prison visits disguised as social calls. And then there's Alley Boy. Carmine's son, Alphonse, is now his most trusted external conduit. He's not just a messenger anymore. He's executing orders, managing disputes, maintaining discipline. It's a delicate role. Lead on the outside, but still in your father's shadow. Persico doesn't coddle him, doesn't praise. He offers instructions, critiques, questions. He treats his son not as a child, but as an extension of his legacy. But with that trust comes enormous risk, because Alley Boy has eyes on him from every angle: federal surveillance, rival crews, and even within his own ranks. The name Persico still commands attention, and attention, in this world, is lethal. Still, Carmine places his bet, not on charisma, on structure. He has Alley enforce policies that feel, frankly, anachronistic in the modern underworld. No drug dealing, despite its profitability. No alliances without a sit-down. No freelance hits, ever. He's preserving a code even as the world shifts away from it. Many younger earners don't understand the restraint. Why avoid heroin when it's pulling in 7 figures? Why wait for authorization when vengeance is personal? But Carmine doesn't waver. He once writes, in a letter passed quietly to a captain, "The moment you stop choosing your enemy carefully, you've stopped being a boss." Still, he's not naive. He sees the world shifting. He allows controlled updates to operations, low-risk fraud schemes, construction graft through LLCs, careful infiltration of under-regulated industries. It's not about power now. It's about preservation. Meanwhile, inside prison, Persico's control is both feared and admired. Other inmates refer to him not by name, but as the chair, as in, you gotta run that by the chair. He doesn't yell, he doesn't bark orders, he makes eye contact, and things happen. Even guards tread lightly. Not out of fear, but awareness. Everyone knows who he is, what he represents. He's the only inmate serving a de facto life sentence who still issues influence measured in concrete movements across state lines. Then, in the early 1990s, the Colombo family erupts again. This time, it's a full-blown internal war. Victor Orena, once a trusted acting boss appointed by Persico, turns ambitious. He starts pushing for permanent leadership. Not interim. Not while Carmine's away. He wants the crown forever. Persico sees it as betrayal. And betrayal, in his mind, requires a full response. From behind prison walls, he mobilizes loyalists. Sit-downs are called. Lines are drawn. Friends become threats. Old relationships burn. The Second Colombo War ignites in 1991, and it is brutal. More than a dozen men are killed, scores wounded. The FBI watches from surveillance vans as Colombo captains are gunned down at traffic lights. Shootouts happen in the streets, in homes, even in front of schools. The war isn't quiet, it's chaos. And yet, Carmine commands from inside a federal box, using handwritten letters, family visitors, and veiled conversations. One federal agent notes, "It's like he's running a military operation through postcards." Eventually, Orena is arrested, convicted, taken off the board. And Carmine? He wins again, but the war leaves scars. It divides loyalties. It weakens the family. It triggers another wave of informants, arrests, surveillance. The feds sink deeper, determined to finish what the commission case started. And yet the Colombo family survives, not untouched, but unbroken, because at its core, at the very center of its blueprint, is a man who refused to yield. So what do you think? Was Carmine Persico too controlling, too unwilling to pass the torch? Or was he simply the last of a breed who believed that if you lead long enough, you become the structure? Either way, his grip tightens, not with violence but with discipline. He once said, according to one old-timer, "A real boss doesn't make things louder. He makes things clearer." And clarity, in a world of confusion and betrayal, is more dangerous than any bullet. By the time the mid-1990s arrive, Carmine Persico has been ruling longer than many Mafia men even survive. He's become a paradox, fully incarcerated, yet fully in control. And while the title of boss is something most wear like armor or a crown, Carmine wears it like oxygen, unseen, necessary, woven into his every move. The Second Colombo War may have ended, but the aftershocks keep rippling through the organization. Trust is eroded. Some capos remain loyal to Carmine, others have been neutralized or imprisoned, and a few have simply gone silent, faded into the suburbs or halfway houses, too afraid to pick a side, too wise to pick the wrong one. Still, Carmine rebuilds. not by replacing muscle, but by consolidating purpose. He doesn't need 100 earners. He needs 10 disciplined ones. Guys who listen. Guys who understand the difference between presence and pressure. Guys who learned from the war that flash can get you killed and improvisation is for cowards. He begins redefining the family's role in the post-Gotti, post-arena mafia. While the newspapers are still running photos of gaudy mob trials and fallen dons, Carmine's vision shifts inward. He focuses on construction rackets again. Low heat, high yield. On no-show union jobs, fake consulting companies, shell corporations folded inside each other like Russian dolls. To outsiders, it looks like retreat. To Persico, it's camouflage. One day, a visiting associate tells him the family's presence on the street is getting too quiet. Carmine reportedly leans forward, smooths a wrinkle in his uniform and says, "Quiet is what we used to fear. Now it's what we sell." Still, law enforcement isn't buying it. The FBI, burned by past failures to penetrate Carmine's buffer zones, begins turning up the heat on his son, Alley Boy. Already deeply embedded in the day-to-day operations, Alphonse is now the de facto street boss, overseeing the very rackets that keep the Colombo family breathing. But that exposure comes at a cost. The feds start peeling back the layers. Surveillance picks up meetings in diners. Phone taps catch coded conversations. Informants start trickling in again. This time, they're quieter, more strategic. The agents aren't looking for splash. They're building structure cases. The same playbook that nailed Carmine is now aimed at his bloodline. And then comes the turning point. The disappearance of William Wild Bill Cutolo. Cutolo, a high-ranking Colombo capo and a charismatic figure, had been gaining influence rapidly. Too rapidly. There were rumors he was positioning himself for leadership. Perhaps even a silent coup. In 1999, he vanishes. No body, no note, just silence. The streets buzz. The feds suspect foul play. The family refuses comment. But internally, everyone already knows. Cutolo had made a mistake. He confused momentum for immunity. Many people still believe the hit was orchestrated not just to protect Carmine's legacy, but to reinforce a single truth. Even from a prison cell, he could still end you. But this time, the consequences are far-reaching. Years later, the FBI begins building a murder case against Alley Boy. They track the aftermath of Cutolo's disappearance, monitor financial activity, flip low-level witnesses. By 2004, Alphonse is indicted, not just on racketeering charges, but on murder. Carmine receives the news with the same expression he's worn for decades, neutral, focused, almost serene, because for all his planning, all his design, he always knew this was the risk. Power built on legacy cannot be passed without cost. In prison, his walks grow slower. His back aches more often, but his mind, still sharp. He reviews Allie's case documents carefully, offers legal insight, corrects punctuation in letters. He can no longer protect his son physically, but he can offer clarity. It's a strange role reversal. Carmine, once the field general, now the aging oracle. Allie, once the messenger, now the embattled leader. But through it all, the family still turns to the elder Persico for answers, and he still gives them, precise, dry, unflinching. One captain writes in a report later seized by the FBI, "He doesn't tell you what to do. He tells you what happens if you choose wrong." The feds, meanwhile, are determined to put the final nail in the Persico legacy. They want Allie imprisoned forever. They want the Colombo family erased from relevance. They want the last threads of the old Mafia world cut and burned. But even with the case in motion, the family doesn't unravel, because Carmine didn't just teach obedience. He taught resilience. He built rituals, habits, a moral rhythm inside the madness. No man is irreplaceable, but Carmine made himself essential, and that makes removal complicated. Many younger members, those in their 30s and 40s now, don't even remember a time before Carmine's rule. He's the template, the first page of the playbook, the watermark on every dollar that passes quietly from hand to hand. So what do you think? Did Carmine Persico protect his son by handing him the reins, or doom him by placing him in an empire always meant to be ruled alone? Either way, Ali faces life in prison. And Carmine? He continues on, still behind bars, still writing, still remembered, less like a man and more like a rule, a constant. The idea that in a world of shifting alliances, surveillance drones, and informants with silver tongues, discipline still wins. Carmine Persico's world is now measured in footsteps between cinderblock walls, in the creak of worn library chairs, and in the slow, meticulous turn of a pen across yellowed legal pads. His breath is steady. His pulse, a whisper. His name? Still wrapped around a family like smoke around old brick. But outside, beyond the prison gates, the iron, the quiet, his empire is no longer what it was. The Colombo family has been whittled down, not collapsed, not erased, but trimmed like a tree that no longer shades the whole block. And the trunk? Still Carmine. Even as the 2000s fade into the 2010s, and then toward the twilight of a new millennium, his decisions echo. They're heard in parole hearings, in whispered phone calls, in the way sit-downs still begin with silence, the kind of silence that once carried his approval, but that silence is growing lonelier. The war with Arena left permanent fractures. The hit on Cutolo opened wounds that never quite closed. And now, with Alley Boy behind bars, sentenced to life, Carmine's dream of a Persico dynasty starts to flicker. Not extinguished, but dimmed. Reality starts to crowd the edges of legacy. He's not sentimental. Carmine never led from nostalgia. He led from logic. And so, in the final years of his life, he becomes something else. A keeper of balance, not ambition. He advises less on who should rise and more on who shouldn't fall. Captains come to him not for permission, but for reassurance that the old ways still matter. He gives it to them in quiet words, in notes written with perfect clarity, no metaphor, no drama, just do what you must, but make sure it survives after you. Meanwhile, the feds haven't stopped. They're no longer chasing headlines. They're sweeping corners, pinching low-level earners, flipping whoever will talk. The Mafia's new enemy isn't bold prosecution. It's attrition, time, fear, a slow leak of relevance. The Colombo family's revenue streams now rely less on gambling, more on union deals, cyber fraud, and medical scams, far from the old world stuff of crates, dockyards, and brown paper bags. The mob today wears hoodies, not fedoras, and Persico watches it from his cell like a man staring through a window into a party he never RSVP'd to. And yet, no one dares rewrite the rulebook, because in every crew meeting, in every deal gone quiet, in every envelope still passed under diner tables, someone inevitably says, "What would Carmine do?" That phrase, 3 words, becomes a compass, a filter, a test. What would he do? Many people still think Carmine never intended to lead for life. That had the commission case not sentenced him to eternity behind bars, he might have stepped aside, given Alley Boy a real chance to lead, moved into retirement with books and espresso and the ghosts of old stories. But others, they argue he never planned to let go. So what do you think? Was Persico a prisoner of his own legacy? Or did he become the legacy because no one else could carry it? Even now, nearly a decade into his final stretch of years, He holds no regrets publicly, no remorse, no tearful courtroom confessions or apologetic memoirs. When asked once, during a recorded interview with a prison chaplain, what he would do differently, he replied, "I'd use fewer phones, that's all." The room went quiet, because no matter the sins, the wars, the choices, he believed in them all. And more importantly, he believed in the system they built, not just as an enterprise, but as an ethic. He never saw himself as a criminal. He saw himself as a manager of a broken city, a man who organized chaos with a pen and a stare, a man who imposed peace through silence. And those who understood him best, they still walk like he's watching, even now, even after the war, even after the trials, even after all of it. Because the thing about men like Carmine Persico is, they don't have to be present to be felt. They're not just feared, they're respected. And in this life, in this world, respect lasts longer than blood. Time has a strange way of moving in prison. It doesn't flow, it settles. Days don't rush by. They stack, slowly. Like chips at a poker game, no one ever wins. For Carmine Persico, now well into his 80s, the years have become measured not by power moves or commission votes, but by routine. Early wake-ups, modest meals, long walks under fluorescent skies, and letters, always letters. But outside, in the world where his name was once spoken with fear and reverence, the Colombo family faces a new kind of threat: irrelevance. The era of televised trials and front-page Mafia glamour is long gone. There are no wire-wearing wise guys making headlines, no firework indictments or sensational mob hits. What's left is gray crime, pension scams, healthcare fraud, skimming off government programs. The money's still good, but the respect, it's not what it used to be, and that eats at the edges of Persico's design. He once ruled a family where silence meant power, where loyalty could be trusted, and where betrayal was punished with permanence. Now, the rules are blurrier, the loyalties thinner. The new generation of earners often care more about avoiding prison than preserving the structure. For every man willing to do time, there are 3 more ready to talk if the walls start closing. Even Carmine can feel it. He begins declining more visits, spends more time reading, speaks less during check-ins. The men who visit him still ask for advice, but now they ask in lowered tones, as if afraid of being caught listening to a ghost. One of the last men to visit him regularly, an aging Colombo associate who'd done 2 bids himself, described their final sit-down like this. He didn't say much, just looked at me, then looked away, like he already knew I was going to ask something I shouldn't. Because that was always the thing with Persico. He knew before you spoke, not out of paranoia, but out of pattern. He understood human rhythms better than most. Understood that pressure makes men show who they really are. That's why he led so long. Not because he forced loyalty, but because he anticipated its cracks. And now, as cracks widen across the family, the organization clings to his memory as a kind of blueprint. New leaders are cautious to make changes. When they alter rackets or move resources, they do so in increments. They reference his decisions. They cross-check against how he would have done it. One young soldier, barely 30, told an undercover agent during a recorded conversation, "We don't do nothing big without thinking." Would the old man nod at this or fold his hands? Even the FBI notices. They see his name pop up not in current operations, but in philosophy. Agents start calling it the Persico Doctrine, a way of thinking that prioritizes structure over emotion, silence over sensation, control over chaos. And maybe that's his greatest trick. Not the crimes, not the survival, but the fact that his logic outlived his actions. Think about that. Carmine Persico, buried in paperwork, boxed into solitary routines, still shapes a world he hasn't walked in decades. His systems outlived his sit-downs. His expectations outlived his orders. His reputation outlived his reach. Few bosses can say the same. Most went down screaming. He went down still watching. Many people still argue over his place in Mafia history. Was he a great boss? A stubborn relic? A tyrant too blinded by bloodlines? So what do you think? Was he too rigid? Or did he simply understand what others refused to believe? That crime isn't about noise. It's about continuity. And Carmine's continuity? It's uncanny. Even in his 80s, partially blind in one eye, struggling with arthritis, moving slowly from one end of the prison yard to the other, he remained the center of the Colombo family's thinking. That's not luck. That's architecture. He built something meant to last, not forever, but longer than those who'd come after him. And in the quiet, humming concrete world of federal incarceration, he holds on, not to freedom, not to legacy, but to structure. Because in the end, Carmine Persico wasn't a boss in the way the world remembers bosses. He was a designer, and what he designed still stands. It's 2019, and somewhere in a quiet hospital room in Durham, North Carolina, Carmine Persico exhales for the last time. The ventilator clicks. The fluorescent lights above don't flicker. There's no grand final moment. No headlines waiting by his bedside. Just stillness. And then, absence. He was 85. The news, when it comes, is brief. Local papers mention a mob boss. Cable news gives it 20 seconds between political chatter and celebrity gossip. The younger generation barely notices, but in select corners of New York, in Bensonhurst, Howard Beach, Staten Island, phones buzz. Not loudly, not urgently, just enough. He's gone. The snake, the chair, the old man, and though the world moves on, though the buses still hiss past shuttered social clubs and the butcher shops now sell overpriced gluten-free pasta, something subtle shifts, because Carmine Persico, who led for over 4 decades, who outlasted coups in courtrooms and 21st century technology, was no longer watching. For the Colombo family, it's an ending they always knew would come. But endings, even anticipated ones, still ask hard questions. Who leads now? What changes? Who remembers the rules? And who was only following them because he was still breathing? In the weeks after his death, law enforcement watches closely. They expect chaos, power grabs, murders, a visible shuffle of leadership as men jockey for what remains of a crown. But the streets stay mostly still, because even gone, Carmine left instructions, not formal ones, not a scroll hidden behind concrete, just expectations he'd embedded into the rhythm of the family so deeply. They had become muscle memory. No flashy funerals, no loud succession, no sudden shifts in territory, just quiet continuity. Still, cracks appear. Younger capos want more autonomy. The money isn't flowing like it once did. Digital crime has changed the game, and some of the family's traditional rackets, unions, waste management, construction, are drying up. The overhead's too high. The surveillance is too sharp. The risk now outweighs the reward, and that's where Carmine's absence is most keenly felt, because while he was alive, even if isolated in prison, he understood the landscape. He adjusted, slowly, but smartly. He knew when to fold a racket and when to revive it. He knew when to make peace and when to make someone disappear. Without him, the line blurs, factions form, not violently, not yet, but ideologically. One group wants to modernize, cryptocurrency laundering, identity theft, offshore networks. The other wants to stay old school, cash businesses, gambling, shylocking. There's tension, but no explosions, just meetings that go longer. Eyebrows raised a second too high. And in these meetings, someone always asks, would the old man have allowed this? And nobody has a clean answer, because Carmine Persico was many things, but predictable wasn't one of them. He was flexible when it mattered, cold when it counted, and above all, deliberate. So what would he have done? Steered the family into digital crime? Or pulled it back to the core? Many people still wonder, but here's what we do know. In the final year of his life, Carmine was still reviewing reports, still writing letters to trusted captains, still asking questions like, how long does it take to move the cash from the Union pension to the Jersey front? Who's running the Brooklyn numbers now that Mike's inside? Why is the Midtown crew eating into Staten Island's vending accounts? He wasn't coasting. He was managing until the very end. And when he died, he didn't leave behind chaos. He left structure. Worn, yes, weathered, but intact. The kind of structure that doesn't collapse overnight. Because Carmine wasn't just building an organization. He was building a survival model for an institution born in the shadows, baptized in violence, and trained to endure. Even now, long after his passing, FBI agents still note, he may be dead, but some of the things he put in motion haven't stopped moving. So what do you think? Did he leave behind a family? Or a formula? Because sometimes the most dangerous thing a man can leave behind is a map. And Carmine Persico's map, still being followed. The years following Carmine Persico's death are quiet, but not peaceful. They hum with uncertainty. For the Colombo family, this is a new kind of test. Not one of survival through bullets or trials, but through directionless time. With no undisputed boss, no anchor behind bars scribbling orders on folded paper, the air feels lighter, but also colder. There's no formal announcement, no coronation of a new dawn, just murmurs. Certain crews begin answering to certain captains a little more often. Old names start getting resurrected. Quiet men with long memories emerge as interim guides. Careful not to use the word boss, because saying boss now is dangerous. It invites scrutiny, headlines, surveillance vans with long lens cameras parked 2 blocks away. So they whisper instead. He's helping keep things level. That's what they call it now, level. Still, you can feel the gaps forming. Small things at first. Bookmakers in Bensonhurst not kicking up on time. A loan shark in Bay Ridge charging interest 2 points higher than Carmine would have allowed. A waste management contract goes to a company that's not family connected, and no one knows who dropped the ball. Under Carmine, that wouldn't have happened, because Carmine didn't allow frays. He stitched. But stitching, when left to too many hands, unravels faster than you'd think. The FBI notes the subtle change too. Internal reports start referring to the Colombo family as diffused. One agent writes, "There's no vacuum of power, just a slow leak." Still, the name Persico doesn't fade. It hovers like old perfume, faint but unforgettable. New earners hear stories. They learn the myth. Some believe he was the last true boss. Others, that he stayed too long and strangled the family's evolution. But even the critics admit, when he ruled, the chaos was contained, and that memory holds power. One young associate wired up unknowingly during a conversation in a Brooklyn bar says, "It's not that we liked the old man. It's that we didn't need to guess what mattered." That's the legacy, clarity. For all his faults, Persico made expectations known. There was no gray area, no winking ambiguity. He expected silence. He rewarded discipline. He demanded results. And he never, ever forgot a favor or a failure. That kind of memory is rare now. Modern organized crime isn't organized. It's nimble, flashy, online. Crews don't meet in smoke-filled rooms anymore. They meet in signal chats. Disputes aren't settled at diner booths, but through disappearing voice notes. And the codes of honor? Replaced by digital discretion and plausible deniability. Still, the Colombo family tries to adapt. A few elder capos form an informal council, not a commission. just a group of men who agree on enough to keep the wheels moving. They carve the city into manageable zones. They create quotas. They establish internal conflict protocols, borrowed, ironically, from Carmine's own prison letters. And it works, for a while. But then come the kids, the next generation. Young, hungry, digitally fluent. They don't remember the blood in the streets, the days when saying the wrong name could get you buried under concrete. They want in, but on their terms. More money, less loyalty, fast growth, faster exits. And that tension, it grows. Some crews begin splitting off into micro-networks, doing deals Carmine would have vetoed. Credit card fraud linked to foreign actors. Cryptocurrency laundering through shady overseas exchanges. Schemes that work, but carry far more risk than the old rackets. And without Carmine's voice, steady, precise, final, there's no one to pull the brake. The FBI sees this as opportunity. The surveillance picks up again, not just on the old guard, but on the new blood. They're sloppier, more confident, less trained. A raid in Staten Island uncovers dozens of burner phones, USB drives filled with transaction logs, and a hit list written in emojis. Yes, emojis. Somewhere in a cell far away, Carmine would have raised one tired eyebrow. And yet you can't help but ask, what would he have done? Many people still believe Carmine had plans beyond his death, that certain instructions still sealed are floating among the loyal, that somewhere, someone holds a list, a final directive, not for revenge, but for continuation, because that's who he was. Not a man who burned bridges, a man who paved roads, even when he knew he'd never walk them. So what do you think? Will the Colombo family survive in this digital fractured world? Or was Carmine Persico the last spine holding it upright? Because leadership isn't about fear, it's about clarity under pressure. And clarity? That was the one product Carmine never allowed to run dry. By 2021, the name Carmine Persico no longer flashes in headlines. It echoes through courthouse transcripts, half-whispered street rumors, and the aching nostalgia of old-timers sipping bitter espresso outside shuttered cafes. His shadow no longer looms in the public eye, but within the Colombo family, it still shapes how decisions are made, when they're made at all. That year, a major federal indictment lands like a thunderclap across Brooklyn and Queens. 14 alleged members and associates of the Colombo family, including senior figures, are arrested in a wide-ranging racketeering case. The charges? Union corruption, loan sharking, healthcare fraud, attempted extortion. Nothing new, nothing flashy. Just the slow rot of systems Carmine once held together with precision. The indictment reads like a requiem. It lays bare how the family has been operating, less like a tightly wound machine, more like a patchwork quilt, frayed at the edges. Informants play their part. Wiretaps collect late-night phone calls where men speak in metaphors they no longer understand. One captain, barely in his 50s, forgets which burner phone he used last week. Another is caught on tape using his real name during a shakedown. In Carmine's day, that would have been unthinkable, because Carmine drilled discipline into the crew like a mantra. He believed in timing, distance, and memory. You didn't speak names. You didn't repeat routes. You didn't forget. But now, the family forgets. It forgets how to be invisible. And when the feds pounce, the arrests don't feel like the thunder of justice. They feel like a shrug. The last open window finally shutting. But even in the face of these arrests, the Persico name remains untouched. No direct line is drawn to his legacy, because his fingerprints were wiped clean long before his death. His genius wasn't just building power, it was burying his tracks beneath the foundation. A U.S. attorney during a press conference says, "We believe this criminal enterprise continued long after its original architect passed away." It's a nod, a silent salute. They know who wrote the blueprint. And here's where things get strange. Amid these indictments, a new name emerges, someone no one expected. A distant relative of Carmine. Not a capo, not a soldier, not even a known associate. Just a man who lived quietly, attended no funerals, appeared on no wiretaps. But the family listened when he spoke, because his voice carried that cadence. He had the Persico stillness, the unshaken tone, and the same obsession with structure. Suddenly, the idea spreads. Maybe the snake didn't die. Maybe he shed skin. Of course, law enforcement dismisses it. They call it romanticized nonsense, wishful thinking from a fractured crew. But inside the family, it matters, because families like this don't run on facts. They run on myth. And Carmine Persico, for better or worse, had become myth. A ghost with a grip still strong enough to hold together men decades apart in age, culture, and criminal ambition. So what do you think? Can myth hold an empire, or does it eventually become an excuse? An excuse to avoid responsibility, an excuse to keep spinning wheels in honor of a past that's too heavy to carry forward. Because while Carmine might have built for survival, he also built for his time. Not this one. This world is algorithmic, transparent, recorded. The new rackets are digital. The witnesses, ubiquitous. Cameras in every doorway, microphones in every pocket. And Carmine? He trusted bricks and whispers. Still, his playbook lingers. In the next few years, indictments keep landing. The family becomes quieter, but not gone. Its name fades from headlines, but continues to stir beneath the surface, like heat beneath old pavement. The young ones don't know the rules, but they know the name. And sometimes, that's enough. Because in a world that forgets fast, memory is power. And Carmine Persico? He made sure his memory came with instructions. As the 2020s unfold, the Colombo family, once a titan of organized crime, navigates a precarious existence. No longer an unstoppable force commanding entire industries, it has become a patchwork of smaller crews, cautious operators, and quiet survivors. The digital age, relentless surveillance, and aggressive federal prosecutions have reshaped the criminal landscape, forcing the family to adapt or risk extinction. Yet, amid this transformation, Carmine Persico's influence remains palpable. He is no longer a man, but a doctrine. His methods, his discipline, and his vision continue to guide decisions, from the shadowed corners of social clubs to encrypted messages flickering across screens. Those who study organized crime often highlight Persico's unique longevity. Unlike many bosses who rose fast and fell harder, he endured decades behind bars, maintained tight control, and kept the family intact through turbulent times. His insistence on strict hierarchy, coded communications, and patience set him apart. He understood that power was less about violence and more about order, but that order faces new threats. The younger generation's ambitions and technology-fueled crimes clash with the old-school code. Where Persico valued silence, discipline, and control, the new operators prioritize speed, profit, and anonymity. The tension between these worlds creates fractures, sometimes subtle, sometimes violent. Behind the scenes, legal battles continue. Former members flip, investigations deepen, and prosecutors adapt to the family's changing tactics. The net tightens, and the old network is tested anew. Yet, Carmine's legacy endures, not just in statutes or stories, but in the structure itself, a blueprint for control, restraint, and resilience that even modern challenges struggle to dismantle. Many still ask, Was Carmine Persico a relic of a bygone era, or a visionary whose principles transcend time? And as you ponder, remember, sometimes the most lasting influence isn't loud or visible. It's the quiet strength that shapes generations from the shadows. Carmine Persico's story is not one of flashy headlines or dramatic last stands. It is a narrative of endurance, quiet calculation, and unyielding will. From the cracked sidewalks of Carroll Street to the cold confines of federal penitentiaries, his influence stretched far beyond the reach of any gun or gesture. He built a legacy that was never about the moment's glory, but about the long game, about shaping a family that could survive without him, even if it could never fully escape his shadow. As we close this journey together, picture Persico not as a distant crime lord, but as a man who understood that true power often lies not in loud proclamations, but in whispered promises and unseen hands. He knew that in the world he navigated, patience was a weapon sharper than any blade, and silence a shield stronger than any armor. And so, when you think of Carmine Persico, think not just of a gangster or a boss, but of the relentless persistence of will, of a man who coiled through decades, adapting, surviving, and commanding respect without ever losing control. His story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful figures are those who wait, watch, and move only when the moment is absolutely right. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the life of the snake of the Colombo family. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let your mind drift. Sleep well.